we're born with very little abilities. We have full mobility in all joints, full range of motion in all joints, but we have very little strength and very little coordination. This develops over time through a series of reflexes that emerge and give us abilities, each one supporting the next. It's a pyramid of abilities that are created by these reflexes and the work that these reflexes lead us to do that becomes part of our voluntary ability to move. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through that sequence that babies go through over the first 2 to 3 years of their life. Because every stage supports the next, if we discover that one of the skills that we developed as babies has become unusable as adults, then we know that everything that is supported by this skill, even though we're able to do it, we know it's being done with compensations. We know we're using improper motor programs to do these movements. So we get skill from the outside in. The limbs develop competence earlier than the core. And pretty much the first thing we're able to do when we're born is lie on our backs and move our limbs. So that's what we're going to be looking at in the first drill. Just lying on our backs and looking at ways in which we can move our limbs. So here I want to look at my ability to be in contact with the floor over all the surface of my back. You can see my feet are slightly floating off the ground and not at the same angle. There's tensions in here that need to be gradually addressed. You can see my hand turning. Tensions inside the forearm, tension inside the shoulder. And gradually I want to move and see the range of motion that I have, keeping both my shoulder and wrist in contact with the floor. Normal range of motion, optimal range of motion, I should be able to go right up to here without having my hands or elbows leave the floor. I have to compensate with my thorax to be able to do that. I am now able to be in this position pretty well, which used to be a problem, so there's progress here. In this position, I should have easily wrist and elbow without the need for thoracic compensation. So I need to relax this. With the legs, I should be able to do this. My knee is probably not going to fall on the floor, but it should be comfortable. There should not be pain here. And the angle should be pretty much the same on both sides, and the sensation should be pretty much the same on both sides. I'm feeling some tightness on this side. And obviously, you can do this sort of stuff. You can do this sort of stuff. And see how the angle is significantly reduced when both legs are in motion. I can do this sort of stuff also, letting the movement of this leg generate the movement of that one. You'll see babies sleeping flat like this, knees touching the floor, arms at 90 degrees, like this. This is a classic sleep position for babies. From here I can start looking at strengthening and improving the coordination of the arms and legs. I have this axis, and I have this axis. So both of them I can look at this sort of movement or this sort of movement, at this sort of movement and this sort of movement, this or this. And you will see babies, when they do this, they'll do it very fast and violently. They'll literally, the inertia of their arms will lift them off the ground. Like this. Obviously, we have the same thing with the legs. We have this axis. We want to be looking at range of motion here. I should be able to break perpendicular very easily with this. Some people will be jammed here. I want to be able to bring my knees close to my body. And obviously there is also this axis. So we have this sort of stuff, this sort of stuff, this sort of stuff, and this sort of stuff. That can be very violent also. So when we have this competence in the limbs, we can start getting competence in the core. And rather rapidly there's a reflex that emerges, whose name I really should have looked up before coming here. And it's the reflex whose name I always forget. That leads to what's called a fencing position. So basically you are on your back, and this reflex will cause, when the head is turning, it will cause the hand and the knee to go in the direction of the gaze. If you're properly paying attention, you'll notice that when you're doing this, it's causing your pelvis to gently rotate from side to side. If you let that pelvic rocking amplify, you'll notice that you're starting to generate a rolling motion that will eventually lead you on your stomach. So you'll notice that when you're doing this, you're sort of falling onto your arm. And babies obviously initially don't have the strength or the control to be able to move their arms around to have a proper position, or the core strength and coordination to be able to get back on their backs. And usually they start crying and you have to flip them back. To return onto your back on your stomach, you will notice that you're on your stomach. If I turn my head, I notice that once more, head movement is causing my pelvis to tilt. If I let this amplify gradually, I will return on my back. Eyes lead the head, head leads the body. Once they've mastered rolling from back to stomach and from stomach to back, babies will roll a lot. And this will, in turn, make their vestibular system more competent. Vestibular system being responsible for balance. And when we're able to roll from side to side like this competently, using core and limbs, we've reached the baby standard. So this is what babies need to be able to pass to the next stage. So it basically looks like this. There is core action and there is limb action. So there's basically two ways of doing this. First one is hips lead shoulders. Hips lead shoulders. Hips lead shoulders. And the other one is shoulders lead hips. Shoulders lead hips. And obviously we should be able to do this quite rapidly. We're starting to get some sort of competence in rotation. Before we can go any further, we're going to need to get some strength and coordination in the posterior chain, so the whole chain of muscles that goes from the base of the feet to the nape of the neck. The movement you see babies do to build this strength is very simple. They start out like this, and they go like this. Babies, being the very physical creatures that they are, tend to do it like this for 20 minutes on end. Movement experts talk a lot about stability. Stability is a combination of strength and coordination. So anytime you want to raise stability, you want to raise the challenge in strength and in coordination of a movement. So babies have two ways of doing this in the case of the movement we just saw. The first one, you'll see them doing this, bridging on the neck. It's a movement you see a lot of babies do. And now you're getting the whole of the posterior chain. If you want to get even more of the posterior chain and challenge your stability even more, on the toes. You see how suddenly I'm not able to get convex? That's because the challenge is neurologically too high and the body is not allowing me the same range of motion. The second thing you will see children do is use this movement as a role. Basically, they will be doing this and this. There's two ways to do this movement. The way I just showed, which is the way babies do it, and threading the needle, which is the biomechanically more efficient way of doing it. So I was doing this, where this hip goes over this shoulder, like this. In threading the needle, this hip will go under this one, like this. Now this has given us the ability to lift our head and look around. To go any further, we need to be able to support our weight with our shoulders. Now the baby standard for doing this is pretty much this. However, we'll see very soon that we're going to need to be able to do this only on one side. So we're bringing back rotational competence as a stabilizer now, and strength in the shoulder. To be more competent with my shoulders and with my core, I might want to go beyond basic baby standards. And here, instead of just lying like this, I can plank on my knees and do the same movement, either on one hand, on two hands, or on one hand. And eventually plank on the feet on both hands or on one. I can also raise the competence of my shoulder with rotation like this. And now we're ready for the first real mode of locomotion: crawling. Here, I want to keep as much of my body in contact with the ground as I can. And basically what I'm having is same principle that I was having with my planking, but like this. And with the legs, I'm having this. Pelvis should stay flat to the floor. So basically what I'm having is this. And when I transfer support to this forearm and this leg, I'm getting this. Notice how the whole body stays in contact with the floor. I can even leave my face on the floor. To go any further, I'm going to need more strength in the arms. I have strength in my shoulders now. I can stabilize with my shoulders. But for the next stages, I need to be able to support part of my weight on my hands. Like this. And obviously, the way I'm going to be using this, I also need to be able to do it on one hand. Obviously, when I practice this, I want to start rather far from my body. That's generating less elongation, and gradually bring it closer to my hips, where it's generating more elongation of the anterior chain. Same thing with the one arm movement. I can start further out and bring it gradually closer to the center of my body. If I want to go beyond this baby level standard, I can raise the complexity by doing the same movements on my knees, or like this. You notice the position of my feet. This position of the feet will make it much more challenging for core stability, because you're not engaging the reflex that associates the toes and the hands and engages the core for stabilization. So it's much more difficult to get proper stabilization from this position. People will tend to need to do this initially in order to do the movement. And obviously, you'll want to work like this, and eventually, which I'm not able to do presently, on the feet. Now obviously, from here, what you will see babies start to do is go to here. Now this is a really good mobility test. You need to be able to really lie down on your thighs. A lot of people have a lot of difficulty bending at this point further than 90 degrees. You really want to be able to lie down on your thighs and elongate and come back. You'll see babies that will be doing this much faster than I'm doing it for dozens and dozens of repetitions. If you want to make this exercise really interesting, with every repetition, widen the knees a little bit. And then you'll see that when you're reaching elongation, you're getting a really fascinating hip stretch. And when you come back here, you can go lower to the floor. Gradually widen, get that really fascinating inside of the hip stretch, and go down until you can really put your stomach on the floor. If you've been paying attention, you probably noticed that the intermediate position in the exercise we just did is this here.
on all fours. And all that we've done has built up to our ability to do quadruped motion. Now you'll see two main motions on all fours that babies will use. The first one is this, diagonal. Obviously, initially, because of poor coordination, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. Eventually, it'll be 1, 2. So the first quadruped competence that you want to develop is diagonal motion. Forwards and backwards. Hand and knee touch the ground at the same time.
Now, you'll see some babies, not all of them, do this next version. It's much, much more challenging for stability. So it's very, very interesting and useful to master. It is one side. Be very attentive to any differences between your ability to do this on one side and the other. Ideally, you want to lift both at the same time and deposit both at the same time. We can obviously start playing with this concept, and instead of using it just as a means of locomotion, we can start using it as a means of movement exploration. For instance, with the diagonal, instead of just moving, I can start playing with options and possibilities. And with the unilateral one, I can do the same. And all that fun stuff. Obviously, there's a lot of quadruped movement options that are not necessarily used by most babies, but that still have lingering presence because of genetic history that are very interesting to explore. You have, namely, movements that are symmetrical, but that are, instead of being left-right, are top-bottom. Like this. Or this. Et les mains au milieu et les pieds à l'extérieur. You also have an array of top limb, bottom limb, sideways motions that are possible. Either like this, or like this. And then you have the more complex movement
of galloping, where front quarters are acting in a symmetrical way, but the hindquarters are acting in a reciprocal, symmetrical way. So, up till now, we've had our limbs moving in either reciprocal, symmetrical way. Walking is symmetrical, both sides are doing the same thing, but they're doing it taking turns. Or symmetrical. And this is front quarter, hand quarter, symmetrical. They're both doing the same thing at the same time. With the gallop, we're seeing symmetrical, reciprocal at the bottom, and symmetrical plane at the top. Eventually, we want to go from quadrupedal motion to bipedal motion. And the transition for this is squatting and sitting. So, if I'm on all fours, I can lift one knee like this, and if I let myself fall completely to the side, I'm sitting. That's probably the first thing I'm going to learn how to do. Get my blocks here and get the action going. And now I'm back to my locomotion. However, if I go a little bit backwards, now I'm in a Cossack squat. And if I go completely backwards, whoop, I'm in a full squat. And from here I can grab onto something and get myself standing.